DBS community, welcome back to another video here with Kyle Chris, and today we're going to be doing a tier list video for set 18. Bit of a disclaimer at the beginning of this video. I enjoy tier list videos. I enjoy watching them and making them, and my favorite part is that every content creator, does not matter who it is, I'm not going to name people, but every single one of us, when we talk about decks or we do deck tier list videos, there's an extreme amount of bias towards all of this stuff, right? I'm going to try to give a complete honest opinion on this stuff, but there will probably be some bias stuff that will kick in, and unfortunately that's just how it is in any card game, I feel like, or anything in general where you have bias towards something because you relate or you really resonate with whatever it is that you enjoy. So take that as you will. I'm going to do this list as compared to the current meta and where I think the meta is going to go. I'm not going to do this list comparing just these leaders to themselves. It's going to be the whole spectrum of stuff, so keep that in mind. We're going to start with blue. I kind of, everything, broke down by color here. We will start with blue and Super Saiyan 2 Trunks. Now, Trunks is a reboot leader. This is obviously the blue starter deck. Not much has changed from the previous deck that was dubbed unplayable due to Bandai mechanics with flipping life, and it's already being revealed. So, with this leader, you unfortunately have to play that really terrible Supreme Kai of Time Unison. And the deck's just kind of okay. I put it in the no category. I don't think it's ever going to top an event. Unless someone finds as most decks would, go, is you would find a really crazy strategy that works. What makes this deck almost rogue is the fact of the 8-drop Vegito is incredibly powerful. However, if you have a barrier removal target, you can just pop it next turn. So there's some weird things in there. But I do think that Vegito boss monster is incredibly good and almost makes it a rogue deck. However, it's not great. So I'm going to put it in the no category here. Next, we're going to do the Invoker-Ku, or whatever you call this leader, the Another World Fighter, the Budokai, Goku. And actually, I'm going to put this list up here at 1.5. I think this is going to be probably the second or third most represented blue deck, maybe at the first event. But this deck here is very, very good. The Paikuhan Goku boss monster is incredible, as well as the actual boss monster itself is incredible. Has a very interesting mechanic. And it has the tools to be a very powerful blue deck, and this is something that I think people really have to sort of look at going forward. It's going to take a really good pilot. It's definitely probably one of the hardest blue decks to play. When you compare it to something like Gamma or even SS4, those are very easy decks. Actually, more so Gamma. Gamma's a very easy deck. I think anyone can probably pick up Gamma and top an event with it. It's very low skill cap. It has a decently high ceiling, I guess, but the deck itself is not hard to play at all. And compared to this Goku, which has a lot of sequencing and a lot of things you have to do with it, especially archetype based, where you kind of forced to play some bad cards, you also are forced to play some really good cards. So that's why I'm going to put it at that 1.5. I don't think it's quite at tier 1 yet, just because there are some, like I said, because you have to run some bad archetype cards, you can't run Overwhelm. It's kind of in this weird 1.52 area, but I'm going to put it at 1.5. We have Paikuhan. I'm going to put Paikuhan in the rogue category. Paikuhan has, again, some very interesting things. It can search out blue extra cards on the front side, which is incredible. You can search out Dirty Burst, which already makes it really good. It has a Z Awakened leader. And I think all the leaders that have Z Awakened leaders are decent, at least. So it's definitely going to be in that rogue category. There's a guy at my locals who plays Paikuhan, and he's, vented that the old Paikuhan leader definitely has more cycle ability. And after looking at the old Paikuhan leader, I would have to agree with him. And what's nice is that all the stuff can be played in the old Paikuhan leader. So this rogue slot is kind of for this leader as well as the old Paikuhan leader, because I do think there's something there. There's something there. I don't know if the new cards are enough to make Paikuhan win an event or top an event. But it's in that rogue category for now until we see someone, you know, do something with it. But I definitely think it's in that rogue slot. It's definitely not the best blue deck. It's not even close to being the best blue deck, but it doesn't need to be able to top an event. It just needs to, you know, win the games that you have in front of you, you know. Next is going to be the promo Goku leader. And I'm going to put Goku here at tier 2. Now, I know this kind of looks like I just kind of stack these, right? But it's true. Like, I definitely think there's definitely some power levels between these leaders here. But this is going to be tier 2. There's people who say that this deck is terrible. There's people who say this is the best deck in the format. I think it's right in the middle. Because there is a little bit of RNG with the Beerus and Zeno combo that you're going to end up doing. If you guys don't know, there's a Beerus card in this list where you can ramp it, but you can never restand it. However, you can just use the Zeno super combo and grab it back and then just ramp it again. So you have this eternal ramp effect, and you can kill someone from 5 or 6 life with turning the tide and then this leader becoming, you know, double strike and crit, and it's got a lot. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with it. Is it better than Baby? Is it better than SS4? Is it better than even Beerus? I don't know. It's probably in that spot with Beerus, which is why it's going to be tier 2. It's going to be something that people are definitely going to play. We probably won't see a ton of it. And kind of where the Goku is, I think we're going to see a lot of Goku. I think particular teams who have been practicing this deck, you'll probably see a lot of it's kind of like when Turles, you know, was kind of pushed onto the scene as that yellow-blue Turles. We started seeing people start playing it more and more, and then it did very well in an event, and then now it's sort of a staple yellow deck. Now we have Bardock. I'm actually going to put Bardock down here. Again, this is tied to everything in the current format. So if this was just a leader of like basing it off of just the leaders in this, it probably would be up in tier 2. But I think this is a terrible deck. I think this is probably the worst yellow deck that we've seen revealed in quite some time. Let me rephrase that. It's the worst yellow deck that has had hype around it that we have gotten released in a while. So there's been a lot of yellow decks that have come out that have just been not very good, like i.e. all of the Android yellow decks, unfortunately, that they just never caught on. They were just never meta relevant. This Bardock has a ton of hype around it, and it does a lot of stuff. I just don't see a world where this is actually going to be a incredibly good deck. You have to play stuff to draw, you know. But it's got some interesting things where you can play older archetypes, but unfortunately, you're kind of stuck with playing the yellow stuff, right? If you could play yellow-blue and all the blue stuff work with this deck would be probably like tier 2, 1.5. But you're stuck with playing all these yellow cards. You're basically playing this entire gigantic Bardock crew archetype. So your tech spots aren't really filled up with, you know, Turleses and Mecha Frieza, you know, Riposte and all this other stuff. I don't see it. I don't see it being very good. I think people are going to try to really force it to be good. And I could be completely wrong. As I said at the beginning of this video, this is completely, you know, I'm trying to not be biased here. I don't see it being very good. And especially out of the yellow decks that have been revealed, it's probably the worst one. Next is going to be the Goku starter deck. I'm going to put this at kind of like this 1.5, 1 tier. It's probably going to go in tier 1. The effect to being able to tap down your entire opponent's, all of your opponent's cards, like at least in battle area and, you know, unison and stuff. This is a gatekeeper for those weird rogue decks that ended up, you know, topping events or even winning events just because people weren't able to really play against them or they weren't prepared. This deck is going to slaughter almost all of those decks. Being able to trigger things like Poutine and Bergamo for free off of your leader swing is incredible value. The engine, although seems kind of heavy, the engine isn't bad. You can play things like you know, Gohan, Unison. You can play things like Turles. You can play, you know, like I said, I already said Bergamo and Poutine. Are people going to play some of that stuff? Maybe, maybe not. But it's definitely going to be a tier 1 deck. I could see it being a tier 1 deck. There's things like Trunks Vegeta, which is also, I still feel like, a tier 1 deck, where this leader doesn't really get a lot of value against that particular deck, right? But you have things like all the red decks that are going to be in the format, because this is going to be a very heavy red format. Yellow already slaughters red as it is, but being able to tap down your opponent's entire board, and then just start killing things, you're just gonna burn through their resources, and it's just gonna be okay. You know, you don't have as much, you don't have as much aggression or as much hand size as this deck is probably going to have. So definitely a tier 1. Like I said, I think tier 1 1.5, but we'll put it at tier 1. Just because I do think it's gonna be probably highly represented, and also just a solid deck. Piccolo facing new foes. So I played against this deck once, probably with a kind of an unfair matchup for the guy who was playing Piccolo, but I do think this deck can be decent. When you read the leader, if you have to read it a different way. So you don't read it as the leader pitching a card. You have to read it as you're playing something from the drop, right? So if it's kind of like Goku in that sense of where you're kind of milling cards and you're gaining value off of it. But being able to pitch a card off Piccolo, but then effectively play that card, and then draw off of your leader, and then draw off of the fact that you played a card, you're gaining a lot of value that way. Nothing has barrier, so green is definitely a weird matchup for this deck, because Charismatic just devours all of these cards. But it's definitely interesting, especially where you can draw any yellow card off the front side. Like, it's got a lot of value to it. So definitely that tier 2 slot. It's I think it's kind of in a competition with itself, honestly. If other decks get popular in the format, so like it doesn't have anything that really like blue definitely would have a good matchup against blue, especially with the Z battle cards having deflect. But the big boss monster being able to swing in the stuff, it has a lot of tools for it, but it is kind of a very heavy sequence deck. So if you sequence wrong, you're definitely not going to do well with this deck. I think this deck has a higher ceiling than a lot of other yellow decks have had in the past. Like a deck like Trunks Vegeta, right? Generally decks that are very simple and don't take a lot of brain power to sequence right are very good in card games. Trunks Vegeta is a very good example of that. The basis of the deck is very easy. You play 1-drop battle cards for free, you pay 1, you draw 2, you gain effects off cards, right? It's a very simple concept. Now there's a second level of that where those leaders become even better when in the hands of really good pilots, because like their tech slots and the way that they sequence their turns overall are more complex. But the base of the leader is very good. This Piccolo, in comparison to Trunks Vegeta, has a very high ceiling of what you're supposed to do sequence-wise, which means that the playability for casual players is probably going to be lower, but people who really study these decks, when people broke Drip-Ku, where people brought, Turles into the format, it kind of fits that slot where people are going to look at it and kind of say, okay, it's probably not going to be very good at the start. However, this deck has a lot of potential because it is a yellow deck, so... it is not a Saiyan leader, so it's probably one of the downsides to it, is why I'm not putting it at 1.5. But everything else other than like Turles it can play, I believe. Or the Bardock. No, it can play Bardock, but you'd probably play Gohan Piccolo, super combo secret rare. So yeah, so we'll put in that tier 2. Next is a Demon God Syn Salsa. So this leader in particular is not very good. It has some cool little tricks that it can do. However, I don't think this leader is going to be amazing. I think it kind of falls into this rogue category. Now, if you ask me about the set, what is that, set 12 Syn Salsa, I think set 12 Syn Salsa is probably the best black deck we have, next to Mechikabura. I know that's not saying much because black doesn't have much currently, but the old Syn Salsa leader is incredibly good compared to what this leader actually does, and everything in this leader can be played in that leader, so you're really just kind of taking the entire archetype and fitting it into that deck. This deck itself, it's in that, like I said, it's rogue. It does some cool things, being able to combo stuff from the drop, but it kind of forces you to play a heavy demon god comp, even like the super combos and stuff. I'm not really feeling this particular, especially as someone who did play majority black for the past, like, 4+ sets. I just don't think it's incredibly good. Next we get to another starter leader. We have actually I was gonna say the last one, but I haven't gone over Pan yet. Gotenks. Gotenks. So Gotenks, really, all Gotenks did was get buffed with this new starter deck leader. It gained 3 new fusions, which was sort of what Gotenks was missing. Essentially, the deck was just, I'm going to shove 4 Grim Reaper of Justice and then just a bunch of tech cards into the deck, right? Now you have the ability of running all of these other fusions, which all do incredible things. And you still have, some really good tech options, as well as 2 new staples with the Fated Rival combination. So this deck definitely gets better from what it used to be. I'm going to put it in tier 2. I think this will be a deck that we will see at top tables. I think this is a deck that will, depending on what you play against, could potentially make, top cuts. But it's really going to depend on how powerful red is. I don't know. It's weird. It's Grim Reaper puts in a ton of work, and you can sort of pick decks apart slowly, but just having more resources than your opponent really doesn't matter that much anymore. I think we're getting into sort of a faster format, and having to pay 2 for Grim Reaper or 3 for the other guy, and like you have tools. It's going to be very sequence heavy for Gotenks. So it's weird. It's like it should be kind of rogue, but I'm gonna put it at tier 2. I'm confident we're gonna start seeing this deck played a lot. There's people who play nothing but green who probably are looking at this compared to the other green leaders and thinking, okay, maybe this is the time to bring out Gotenks. So I think tier 2 is where it is. Master Roshi. So I was really high on this deck going into the set, and as I sort of broke down, the list to myself, and I've had the list built now for almost a week. It's very underwhelming in what the actual deck can do, but the problem with this deck is the setup needed to make this deck functional. So not only do you need the 20k guy in your hand, you need the corresponding 1-drop on the field, and you have to KO a battle card to be able to play out the stuff, right? That's where this problem is. If it was just KOing something and playing the 3-drops out, it would be much better. If you didn't need a 1-drop on board on your side of the field to play it, you have a very good deck. Unfortunately, it's kind of in this rogue category. It's not very good. There are probably 2 builds of this deck that we'll probably end up seeing more consistently. One is primarily a hand destruction build where you really focus on playing out 1-drops using the Bardock Unison and just ripping your opponent's hand away. That particular build is probably going to be decent. It's probably going to be the better out of the 2, depending on obviously the format and everything. But the problem is that we're gonna have a lot of more aggro-centric decks in this coming format, I feel. And this is sort of a slower deck. Especially not being able to restand energy off your Awaken is tragic. Very, very bad. I even tried like green-blue. It just doesn't feel as impactful. The other build is a very heavy aggro strategy, which again takes sequencing and having to play out these 3-drop 20k guys, but you needing a little guy on board really kind of hinders what you can do. The other problem is when you use the field spell to play out the 1-drops on your opponent's side to swing into them, you can't play anything that's not World Tournament or Turtle Skull for the turn, meaning you can't Charismatic, you can't Dodoria, you can't Boo counter. There's a lot of other things that you can't do on offense, and that could hurt you with not being able to stop floodgates and stuff. And it really focuses you on, like, I need to sequence correctly. And it's almost too much sequencing, because then if you don't sequence correctly or something goes wrong, now you're set back a turn and your curve just goes out the window. So, rogue category, just because hand destruction, against particular decks could be good. So it's, you know, I think Hand Shark is always kind of that rogue. King Piccolo. I think King Piccolo is tier 1. There's a few things that could make it not be tier 1. One is heavy blue strategies, like Blue Baby or SS4. If you can't kill them before they get their stuff online, the typical King Piccolo deck will probably falter. I think the best way of building King Piccolo is building sort of a tempo strategy where you have really aggressive early turns, and then as the game goes on, you still have powerful boss monsters that you can play. Whether it's the Majin Buu or the Majin Vegeta Unison, whether it's the Fated Rivalry combination, whether it's you're running Xeno Cell as your secret rare. You have a lot of options for late game potential. That way, because this deck is going to continue to draw, you have very good Unison play. You have free plays, you have spot removal. So you have ways of dealing with almost everything in the format. So now it's going to come down to how well you are as a pilot with this deck. And that's, you know, making sure you're not just taking your life down the 2 so you can use your Z Awaken, right? This is, you know, making sure you're able to punch damage through against particular decks, primarily against red decks, right? Where red decks in this coming format are just going to be able to wipe your board. How well can you reestablish? Doesn't matter if you can reestablish or not. Like if you're able to you know, reestablish your board, did you waste too many resources? Like there's a lot of questions going on with it. However, there's a lot of decks where if you're just the better pilot and your opponent decides to tap out, or your opponent decides to, you know, do something what gives you the advantage, you can just slaughter them in a turn. Like you can take someone down you can awaken turn 2 and have 4 or 5 swings, if not more, and pressure someone down to where that's, you know, they have very little resources to kind of continue the game. So I think it's going to punish a lot of very bad players, and it's going to be able to compete with the decks like Gamma, the decks like Trunks Vegeta, the decks like U7, just because you can push just as much as they can. And, you know, despite what people think, there's a lot of green tech that you can put into decks, and to this deck primarily for defensive purposes. I'm not going to share them in the video. People who play green know this. There's a lot of good green cards that you can play, and people who are making these videos talking about green not being good, they're probably not reading into these cards, but that's okay. That's fine. So when people play these cards and they do well against people and they beat them, you can realize, go, okay, I probably should have been prepared for it. So King Piccolo is definitely going to be tier 1. Now we get to red. So I'm going to do Pan first. I think Pan's tier 2. It's tier 2. So there's 2 variations of Pan. There's mono red Pan and then there's red blue Pan. Both are very decent. However, with all of the rest of the red in the format, I don't think we're going to see a lot of Pan being played, which is why it's going to be tier 2. If this was one of the, like, if there was only 2 red decks coming out in this coming set and Pan was one of them, Pan would probably be 1.5 because of the amount of people who would be playing the deck, and because the deck is very good, the amount of people who would be topping or winning events with this deck. Unfortunately for Pan, we have U7 still, and then we have these 2 gigantic juggernauts of decks that are going to be coming out that are going to take up probably the most of red slots, from, you know, people who play this game professionally or people who play this game at a very high level. They're going to be playing these 2 decks. Pan's just not going to see as much. The reason why it's not Rogue is because it is better than all of these decks down here, and it's red, and it can play, it has one of the best secret rares. It's got some of the best defensive cards. It has probably the best Z battle cards for the game currently in that Goku. Slightly better than Vegeta because of the effect that it can gain from being played in the Pan deck. So tier 2, just because unfortunately it's just going to fall short because of these 2 next decks that we're going to talk about. So we have Syn and Super Saiyan 4 Goku Vegeta. So this is going to be the topic of discussion for most tier lists, is which leader is better, and is there a clear winner to which one's going to be better. Now we have as the posting of this video, we have an event coming up this weekend and then one next weekend, or the month afterwards, I think. No, it should be next week. So outside of that, I don't think there's any other big events. Everything else is going to be store champs or locals or things like that. But I think both of these decks are going to be probably the most represented decks at most of these big tournaments, as well as locals and stuff, unless people are just allergic to playing red. The trick with both of these decks is which deck has sort of the advantage over the other one. And I think Syn is slightly better than Gogeta. I'm just going to call it the Gogeta deck. Syn is slightly better than Gogeta in what the deck can do. So I think in the mirror, I think Syn's probably going to win primarily, most of the time. However, overall, I think it's close. I think it's very, very close of which one of these are going to be better. I'm going to put Syn as the tier 1 deck out of the two, and then SS4 as the 1.5 deck. I think it's very close. So the gigantic Gogeta that everyone's talking about, I think it's a very, very good card. However, it does leave you open for getting clapped on the next turn, right? Yes, it's as good as a card as it is. If your opponent, I guess the way of beating this Gogeta deck is to stay above 4 life. So staying at 5 life is as much as you can, if it's possible, right? Because you can't do anything against that Gogeta card. However, once your opponent plays that card, they're walking into, they can block 1 attack. They have they have testing the ops and stuff like that. But you're gonna have 4 energy, if not 5 energy, and most decks, at least the higher competitive decks, are gonna be able to do a lot of value off that energy, just because red's not gonna be able to stop much with no energy up. Even if they use their Z Awaken, right? Yes, they can become a 100k leader, but then they lose that on defense. They can't use it on offense, and there's a lot of things for it. While Syn just has value just across the board on what this leader can actually do. Nothing in the Syn deck seems broken, but everything seems high tier value. Unisons are not going to survive against Syn. It's actually primarily a good idea to just not play Unisons against this deck. Unless your Unison has a way of keeping itself alive or +2ing, and you're able to keep it on board, it's going to be really difficult in the later stages of or kind of like that the mid turns, so turns 3, turns 4 against the Syn deck. If you make it that far, your Unison's just not going to survive. While against Gogeta has a better time in late game scenarios against every color except for blue. So it's weird. It's weird. I think overall against most of the meta, Syn is going to be primarily the favorite to come out. Gogeta's still going to probably stomp a lot of the format, which is why it's still in a 1.5 slot. However, I think Syn's just slightly better, and we're going to put it at tier 1. So let me look through this again, just to make sure that I'm comfortable with where I put these decks. Tier 1, for sure, I think these are the best 3 coming out, and that work the best in this next format. Both of these decks for 1.5, for sure, definitely going to be there. Tier 2 is pretty set in stone. I think this is pretty good for tier 2. Rogue, yeah, I actually feel more confident probably putting this. Yeah, that's fine. Rogue's fine. And again, like I said, this Paikuhan, I kind of made a little asterisk with this Paikuhan because this Paikuhan is also referring to the last Paikuhan. It's kind of, like I said, a rogue slot, and then both of these decks I think are pretty bad. So yeah, this is a pretty good list. So let me know what you guys think. I'm curious to see how many people disagree with me on some of this stuff, and if people do agree with me, that's great too. I always just like to make these are fun videos to make, because as serious as we try to make these tier lists, it's fun. It's fun to just kind of throw your opinion out there. But like I said, I try to make this as unbiased as possible, because personally, I really would put a black deck. If you guys have watched my content before, I would probably put this deck way up here. if I'm being biased, but I just don't think it's realistic. So, but that's the video for you guys today. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think of the list, and I'll see you guys in the next video.